Welcome to our Not Quite So Abandoned YouTube channel. We're going to do a pretty fun video today, and one that people have been asking us a lot of questions about. So I hope that this is informative, and I hope you enjoy watching. Thanks.
Yeah, this is a video that's come about from a lot of questions from a lot of breeders. So we're going to talk about Nidovirus. Nidovirus is a new upper respiratory virus. It's been around for a few years, not as long as the others. And I've been getting asked a lot of questions. Brittany's been getting asked a lot of questions. So we would like to go ahead and introduce ourselves for the people that don't know us. I am Johnny Gobble.
And I'm Brittany Gobble.
And we are Gobble's Reptiles. And we want...
You did it like we needed jazz. And we are.
And so we're going to talk about this over the next little bit. And I would like to say that this is the current information. Today's date is June 17th, 2022. So the information can change quickly. It has over the last few years. And as more information comes in, we may update the video or just delete this one and restart a completely new different video. But this is the current information we have right now. So we're going to get started, and we've got some notes to go over. That way we can keep on track, and we're going to hopefully educate you guys on Nidovirus and help you make some decisions of what you need to do for your snakes. We're going to talk about a virus. For those people that don't know, this is the Nidovirus.
The elephant in the room.
The elephant in the room. We're going to talk about it in ball pythons because that's where I get most of the questions right now, although it can affect pretty much all the pythons and the boas, and it does not affect the colubrids. So for people that have a mixed combo of snakes in their home or in their breeding area, the colubrids are not affected by this. I want to start with some credentials so that you guys know that we're not just making a lot of this stuff up. I've been a veterinarian for 26 years, more than 26 years now. I've worked with exotics. I did not do a lot with snakes in the beginning just because there's not a lot to do in my area with snakes. But since we've become breeders, I've done a lot of classes with snakes, found out a lot of information, talked with a lot of vets, talked with a lot of breeders. So I've got a pretty good background, and then I also have a very strong background in contagious medicine, herd health, like with cattle. And let's talk about snakes being a herd. A lot of people don't think about that, but you got 5 or 6 or 500 or 600. That's a herd of animals. That's not an individual animal. So when you treat herds of animals, it is different than treating pets. And then my wife, she's got a lot of experience with breeding. Back before we did snakes, we did cats, we've done dogs, we've done betta fish. We have a lot of breeding experience. And with any kind of breeding animal, there is sickness.
There's always sickness, and you have to learn, and sometimes you learn the hard way when you've accidentally spread it. We've learned from showing, the risk that the cat shows would give you, and stop talking to a lot of vets about how diseases spread in that case. So, this is not our first rodeo when it comes to a disease that is contagious and can spread.
Nidovirus is a virus that causes upper respiratory in these snakes. There's a lot of information out there, and Google has a lot of information. There's breeders with a lot of information. Veterinarians have a lot of information, but not all of it's complete. None of it really is complete because we need more information before we can make these decisions. But it's been around for over 7 years at this point, and it came on everybody's radar around 2015. And it is a scary situation because it's a more severe upper respiratory infection than what we're used to. A little disclaimer, this is our opinion. My opinion as a veterinarian, which different veterinarians may have different opinions. Her opinion as a breeder and someone who goes to the shows. So we're going to start off by talking about some facts. I have talked with multiple veterinarians about this virus. I've talked with many breeders about this virus, and I've talked with one of the labs. I contacted both of the big labs that we use as breeders. One lab has not responded to date, the other lab did, and I would like to discuss the facts that I have come up with, and then we're going to give you some thoughts from our opinions and some things that we have to decide as breeders later on in the video. And one of the big things that I want to bring about is we don't know all the answers. And if you have a difference in opinion, by all means, you can email me. We'll give you our email address at the end of the video. But if you do that, please present it with some scientific backup, because a lot of people have opinions. But if you don't have the...
This is one of the reasons why we wanted to present this video. is, we all have experiences as breeders. And just like he said, different vets have different opinions. A lot of times those opinions are based on who their mentor was, who taught them, specifics in these different fields, as well as what they're seeing in their practice. If a veterinarian is seeing an area that did have an outbreak of Nidovirus, they're going to have a different, they're going to form those opinions on that.
Yes, and it may be different than someone who's never seen Nidovirus.
Right, so they've not really encountered it, or maybe they encountered it and it was a single snake and they never saw it again in however many years of practice. So we really want to do this video, and again, like you said, you're welcome to email, and if you have experienced Nidovirus, we would be interested in that information as well, as he's going to continue to talk to these doctors and try to help pull some more research, to figure things out, because we've got a lot of open-ended questions. Again, the first part of this video, we're trying to stick to the facts of what he's been told, speak at this time from these different places, and that way, everybody has a different opinion, but this is based on the facts from the experts in the field at this time with the most experience.
So as we've said, the Nidovirus is an upper respiratory virus, and it can cause a lot of problems, but let's start with some of the signs that they have. Upper respiratory can be as mild as just going off food, to as severe as open mouth breathing. Sometimes you'll see a snake yawn excessively. That could be a sign of it. A discharge from the nose, a discharge from the mouth. Both of those can be a problem. You can hear whistling when they breathe. In fact, one breeder, he said the smartest thing that you could do, and I agree with this, is go into your snake room at night when they're the most active. Once the lights have gone off, you wait a little bit of time, these snakes come out, they're nocturnal. You can listen and see if you can hear any whistling or any weird breathing noises, because if you can hear that, then you might be able to pinpoint a problem. And this is not just for Nidovirus, this could work for any of the respiratory viruses. The virus is spread through an oral discharge, it's spread through a nasal discharge, and here's something that I didn't know until I talked to one of the veterinarians, it's spread through a fecal discharge.
That makes this a big problem.
So snake can poop, crawl through it, and now the virus is on its skin from the stool. So it's a big problem with spread. It's out there from any mucus that they create. And we'll talk about how it is spread through these mucuses later. And I don't even know if mucus is a word. Mucuses is a word. But anyway, we'll talk about that later.
And also, this isn't the only virus that would have upper respiratory signs.
Yes, there is multiple viruses.
Just because he's saying listen for these signs, you don't have to have a full meltdown.
Yeah.
If you hear it, there are other things. That would be like us, saying that every time we got a cold, it was allergies. Sure, some people get allergies, and some people get a cold, and some people get the flu. There are still different things. This is not the one and only thing that is out there.
Correct. So it's shed in all this mucus that these snakes produce when they're sick. And there was a research paper where they did a study. They laid the virus out at room temperature and measured how long it would live, and they infected ball pythons with it, and they found that it lays around at least 7 days, and there is some thoughts that it may lay around in the environment for 7 to 14 days. That's surprising. Pretty scary. We didn't think it would lay around that long. So when you think about it, if you have a snake, it has mucus on its mouth, it sticks it to a bin, it sticks it to a water dish, it sticks it to your tongs. If you don't do some sort of cleaning, that virus could, in theory, remain on those items for 7 days. Which means that if you go in there the next day and forget that you use those tongs on this snake and use on another snake, you could spread the virus that easily.
Or pick a snake up and you drop it in your scale to weigh it. You don't want to forget your weight, so you pick up your snake and you grab your pen or your phone to type that in or write that in, and you drop that pen, put the snake up. You watch the scale because you're cautious about doing that. You make sure you don't set the snake down on the countertop or anything like that. Your pen is contaminated now.
Because you handle the snake and then handle the pen. Same goes for when you go to shows. Yeah, you wash your hands with the sanitizer they have there. But if you pick up the snake and let it crawl around you, let it crawl on your phone, or you take your phone out after you handle a snake, take a picture, put your phone up, and then wash your hands, that virus can be transmitted through these fomites. And fomites are basically any object that can translate transmit, you don't translate things, transmit the infection. So it's very scary with this research out there, and this is a documented research paper, that it lays around in the environment that long. So that's going to be very scary. About where it's at and all this mucus forms, it can live in the environment for 7 days. Well, how long does it take to show signs? Well, there was another paper. This is a shady area because there's not enough research, but one paper, they infected these ball pythons, and in 4 weeks they saw clinical signs. Not before, but right at 4 weeks. Also talking with breeders though, and talking with some veterinarians, there is some ideas that the incubation period, which is the time from they're exposed to the time they show signs, can be as long or a lot longer than the 4-week time frame. I also talked with one of the labs about detecting the virus, and they claim they can detect the virus sometimes before the clinical signs appear. So there's a lot more research needs to be done, a lot more testing needs to be done before we can truly say what the incubation period is. But we've heard things as far as 1.5 to 2 years before they break. We've also heard things that they can break within a day. And I truly believe both of those are false. Some of the other veterinarians also agree with me that those are false.
Yeah, and we'll get more into the our thoughts on
Yes.
some of that too. But basically, one of the big points here with what he just said was that there's like 3 stages. Because you have your snake that has been exposed,
Yeah.
but it is showing no signs. It hasn't broke.
Yeah.
No different than you take your kid to Disneyland and they touch those rails and lick the fingers, and guess what? Your kid is now harboring the virus, but they've not succumbed to it. It's not broke. It's that incubation time.
Yep.
3 to 5 days later, your whole family's going to be miserable, but you'll enjoy that trip. And then you have your snakes that might show signs, but the signs might not be that noticeable.
Yeah.
They could be so minute that you may miss it. But technically they still, they're shedding, and those would be the ones too often that, like, when they say that they're finding it before they're showing clinical signs, it could be that they are showing clinical signs, but just not to where, and you'd have to be like obsessed with your snake,
Yeah.
watching it a lot, and you'd be like, wait, no, I've checked my journal, and Fluffy isn't doing what Fluffy normally does. And then you have your snake that's very clearly stretching to try to breathe, yawning, whistling, a lot of the stuff that you talked about. So there's kind of, it's not necessarily like it has to be, the snake with Nidovirus is the one gasping. There are different points.
And so in the paper, these are researchers that did look at the snakes every single day, looking for clinical signs of this respiratory infection. And so it took 4 weeks from the time they actually exposed the snake to the virus, and they knew they were doing it on day 1, 4 weeks before they saw the first clinical signs. So I'm going to have to, for the argument of this video, say the incubation period is 4 weeks minimum at this moment. That can be changed, that might be different, but I think that, and that's an important number for when we start talking about what we do in the future. 4 weeks is a very important number, although it could be longer. Most of the vets think that there are longer incubation periods, and many of the breeders think there's longer incubation periods. But right now, that's why we're taking so much time to talk about this, is because there is some debate. There needs to be a lot more research done for that. So on that topic of the incubation time, one of the things that I want to bring up, and she already touched on it, talking about the 3 stages or the 3 types of snakes that might have the infection. A lot of the breeders or not the breeders, but the veterinarians that believe that the incubation time is not super long, they say the problem is the people are not seeing the signs because they're very minor, they're very subclinical. So you don't have obvious respiratory signs, and it's being missed. So that's why some people are saying, oh, I had one for a year and it never showed signs. It may have been showing minor signs that person didn't see, or maybe again, with our number of snakes that we have a very small number compared to many breeders, we don't sit and watch them for 2 or 3 hours each. We just don't have enough time in the day to watch them 2 or 3 hours each. So you pull open the bin, they look fine, they're eating, everything's okay. You assume that snake is healthy. But subclinical signs means, well, that snake may whistle once in a while, or that snake may yawn a little bit more than it should, and they're just minor. And it could be shedding the virus during this time also, but we are not noticing it. So that's why there's a few veterinarians in the world that don't believe there's a long incubation time, simply because of that we're just missing these signs that the virus is already there and we just haven't noticed it. There is a little bit of good news. There is another research paper out there. That research paper says that it is not spread from mother to babies. So if you have an infected mother, they actually had an infected mother, they laid the eggs. Now they did wipe the eggs, and you can use different things. Chlorhexidine is very safe for all young animals. I use it in my clinic all the day on these neonates when I have to clean wounds out, stuff like that. Chlorhexidine, a lot of vets can get for you. You can also buy it offline. You can also use some other cleaning materials, but believe it or not, just the act of wiping with a moist cloth can remove a lot of the virus. Because
Moist. People hate that word.
Moist.
Also, real quick, I just wanted to comment. He is talking, though, not maternal incubation. The mother was not left with
Yes.
the offspring. You are removing the eggs, cleaning them, then they're incubating and they're hatching, pipping from those eggs.
Correct. Because if you look again, we're not talking about boas here, but boas give live birth. So if a boa is sick, once she gives live birth, those babies are automatically exposed through her fluids, through her respiratory, through her stool, through living in the cage with her too long. So a boa giving live birth could spread the virus to their offspring at birth. But we're talking about ball pythons once again. This study was not a ball python, it was another python. It was multiple babies. None of the babies tested positive for the Nidovirus once they were hatched. And I know another veterinarian that is doing a ball python study. He had a positive snake come into his facility. He is going to try to get a male to breed that snake sometime in the near future because this female snake is doing well, and then test the eggs. So I look forward to seeing those results as soon as they're made available. But right now as it stands, the baby ball pythons, once they're out away from mom, you don't have to worry about it being spread to them, which means if you're good with your biosecurity, then your baby ball pythons that you're sending out should not have the virus in them, even if they're coming from a positive mother.
And a good example we had of this was when we worked with cats, there is a feline herpes virus. Mm-hmm. And we talked to a lot of expert vets and in the field about the herpes virus. And we wanted to know if the babies being birthed through the birthing canal could actually get the herpes virus.
Yes.
And they told us it was not possible, that they automatically have mom's immunity because they're nursing. So as long as they're nursing, they're not going to be able to pick up that virus for a few weeks at least. So they can't come out. And we actually, because we were very proactive, we were trying to figure out more about this, how it worked, how it spread. And we ended up having a kitten that passed away at 10 weeks old. Mother raised it, and it passed away, not 10 weeks, I'm sorry, 10 days. And we sent it in to have a full necropsy done, and it came back with the feline herpes virus, and we had kept those kittens and that mom quarantined from every other feline. So the only exposure they had to this virus was directly from the mom, which proved that it was either from her cleaning them, from them being exposed after birth nose to nose, or it was from the vaginal fluids exchange and that kind of thing. We then had that mother, we did a C-section with her, and they were taken out before she had any contact, nose-to-nose contact, or vaginal fluids, and we raised those kittens. We also tested the kittens from that litter. None of them had the feline herpes virus. So I know cats are different, but it's more or less that same concept. If you're taking them and they're not having contact with the mother, then you should be, at this point with the research, you should be.
So I'd also like to touch on some of the things that's being said out there, that a lot of the research veterinarians believe that this is a very bad virus, not only by the way it's spread, but they believe that it's 100% fatal. A couple of veterinarians have voiced that opinion that eventually it will kill the snake. There's some breeders out there that will claim that it don't always kill the snake, that they've had positive snakes, they've kept those snakes for various reasons, and those snakes have survived. We don't know how long, because again, there's not enough research. We know these snakes can live many, many years. The virus has not been in the colonies. that long, so where we're not getting good data on that information. There was someone a breeder voiced the opinion to me that they thought that 25% of the snakes could survive. Another breeder, and this is legitimate too, also read somewhere that it's not the actual Nidovirus that kills them, it's the secondary infections that occur. And some of the veterinarians agree with that. Some of the veterinarians agree, well, if you have an infection from the Nidovirus, if you treat it for the secondary infections, you can pull it through it. But those veterinarians also say, but they've always got that virus and you have to take that into account. That's the reason why this virus is very scary. There's an opinion that it's never cleared from the pet or the breeding animal, either one, and it's just sitting there waiting to be spread. So that's why it's a very scary virus. And I just wanted to touch on that also before we move on for anything else.
Well, and I was going to say that the vets that you talked to, they were very happy to know that more information was being spread.
Oh yeah.
And they were also a little frustrated because they're not getting access because of the stigma of Nidovirus and the fear of it. And not just the fear of this happening to your collection, but the fear of what could happen if the word of that got out.
Yeah.
That they're not following up. The vets will say, they get a positive. They'd love to know more about that, but most breeders either are not comfortable with that, or they're not going to risk it, so they go ahead and just kind of shut down their entire operation. So there's no follow-up. A lot of the research we have as far as collections that had it is a little bit older because we just don't know. It's a scary thing, and if you want to keep working, sometimes it's just like, let's just cut our losses and start again, which is understandable. But it doesn't necessarily help with long-term research to know if ball pythons have gained the immunity, because immune systems adapt and develop all the time.
Yep.
Have they gained that?
Yeah. And the other thing is like she was touching on, she didn't actually say this, but a lot of people, when they get a snake that has any respiratory whatsoever, they euthanize it. So that becomes a problem for veterinarians because we cannot follow through. We cannot contact you and say, did it spread to other animals? How did it spread to other animals? Do you have any idea how long you had that snake with those signs? Because it's gone. And then a lot of these snakes are not even being tested, so we don't know the actual statistics of Nidovirus. If it's sneezing, a lot of breeders don't want to take the risk, so they will have it euthanized. And that is smart for the breeder. I mean, if you don't want to fool with that, and it's a situation that you can't risk spreading through your population, because these viruses can wipe out a population. There are breeders that had to shut down their entire facility. Even pet owners had to get rid of all their pets simply because of a virus reaching into their animals. And that's true with all animals, not just snakes. We know people with cats that got a very fatal disease called FIP. It can go through them, start wiping them out, start killing these kittens before they're even old enough to wean, and it just shuts you down, and you get depressed. So it tends to happen. But the veterinarians I talk to want more information. So if you are out there and you have this experience and you want to send it to us, we can. We do not speak of people's names. As a veterinarian, I don't speak
talk
of
about Bruno. No,
we don't talk about Bruno. The veterinarians I talk to do not mention names. They do keep it secrets. I know everybody's afraid that, what if they tell someone? We will tell stories. And if someone knows your story, they'll recognize your story, because a lot of these stories are specific. But they will only recognize your story if you told them. So we do keep these things to ourselves as far as names go. But just like you'll hear later on, and like I've already said, a breeder said this to me, a breeder said that to me.
And that was exactly how, just so you guys know, the vets he spoke to. Vets there is a courtesy among vets, but even then, you were provided no names.
I have no idea where this information comes from unless it's in a scientific paper. And then they don't mention names of the breeders, they just mention who wrote the scientific paper.
So just to make that very clear, if anybody was going to get the names of the stories and stuff these experts told you, it would be another vet. But even then, they were careful to keep the privacy of the people working with them, to give them more information. Mm-hmm. And again, Johnny does the same thing. We've had a lot of people reach out to us, either just to him or to both of us. And those aren't our stories. Like, they're fine with us using their stories to help with the information, but we would never risk using their names or their facilities or anything like that as, letting people know, because there unfortunately is a divide.
Yeah. And the lab I talked to did the same thing. The lab told me multiple stories of people they've worked with, no information as far as names, addresses, and actually species. They were talking very bland. It's like, I didn't even know if we were talking about ball pythons, boas, Burmese. I didn't know what we were talking about. So that hopefully will encourage you all to reach out to your veterinarians, or at least to some veterinarians that are trying to study this virus, so that we know more. And we will get into that when we start talking about the ethics and the ideas and stuff like that. Brought up the labs. There is a lot of testing out there for Nidovirus, and I did not agree with this in the beginning, but after talking with a lot of them, if they're doing them correctly, if you get a positive snake, it's positive. Now let me explain that. If they're doing good biosecurity, no contamination in their lab, and if they're doing a check test on their test. So in other words, you're all familiar with the little pregnancy test, positive and negative. If they're doing a single test that just shows positive or negative, some of those tests can show positive, which are not positive. But most of the labs take that test, oh, it's positive, take the sample and run another test against it. One of the labs actually does a DNA test against it. It's more expensive, but if they get a positive, they want to do that test to confirm that it is a positive test.
I was tested for Lyme's disease, and the way the Lyme's disease test works is there's basically a simple, is that in the blood, yes or no? If the answer is yes to that lab, and not everybody does this, but that lab then automatically, before they even give you their results, goes ahead and runs it to get more specific about what that Lyme's disease. So it's not rerunning the same test. It's actually running a test with a little more detail, and that's automatic. That is just, if you do the one and it's positive, you go to the next step, and that next step can sometimes actually find negatives. Like, it was a false positive. It shouldn't have been a positive.
Yeah, and some of the labs actually, if they get a positive and then a negative, run a third test or even a fourth test to confirm the negative or the positive. So I would have to say that at this point, I have to agree, and the vets I talk to agree too, that if you get a positive test, it has found that virus. It has found Nidovirus if the labs are doing these multiple tests on their positives. So make sure that your veterinarian is running these tests, or if you're doing these tests yourself with the two, actually I think there's more than two labs, but there's two major labs, and I'm pretty sure they are doing these tests appropriately, as long as they're not doing any kind of contamination. Positive means you're positive. Negatives do not mean you're negative. So that's the big debate that we have.
Also, real quick, there can also be user error.
Yeah, that's the contamination or user error.
Just like we talked about with weighing and using the pin. Let's say you got a snake in a few days before, and you tested it, and in the same area you wipe off your counter, you get another new snake in, and maybe you didn't think about your pin, or your shipping box that you open the drawer to get a shipping box out, whatever. There is a chance that the person also accidentally
I didn't think about that. The sampling error is what that is actually called in veterinary medicine, not user error.
So they would have got, they sent that sample in, but it was contaminated from another animal.
So you contaminated it as the person taking the sample, but the lab can also contaminate it if they don't have good biosecurity there with their samples. And that way you get positive. But negatives are checking for the virus. So you get a negative test, that means that the virus is not there. That means that the snake may not be shedding it. That means you did not get a good enough sample that had the virus in it. Or that means that for whatever reason, the virus is completely not there. And that's what we want, is the virus not to be there and that the snake to be negative. But that doesn't guarantee you're negative. And we're going to talk about some of the protocols of testing here in just a minute. But just remember, a negative test doesn't mean you're negative. And a positive test does mean you're positive if there is the multiple test technique. And most of these tests are swabs with good directions on how to do those swabs. Again, you have to remember as the person, if your vet's not doing it, and even your vet needs to learn, because some vets do not know how to take samples from snakes. They need some snake experience. But any vet could do it. You can do it at home. A lot of these labs send you the kits at home. But you do need to make sure you have a good sample. When we test the dogs for DNA and for viruses, we do a good 10-second swab. And sometimes even a 20-second swab to make sure that the sample we're sending in has as much of whatever we're looking for on that swab.
How many of us had that in the last couple of years? They stick that thing up your nose and they spin and spin and spin and they're like, just hold it, and you're like trying not to sneeze.
Oh yeah.
It's the same concept. If they just stick it up there and pull it right back out, there is the chance that you blew your nose or whatever and you don't get it.
Correct.
With a lot of animals, with cats and dogs, we actually have to put them in a crate with no food and water or anything
For at least 30 minutes.
before we swab, because they could have been, like if another dog licks, like you have two dogs together and they lick each other, then that can mess it up.
Cross-contamination.
If they eat or drink, they could have actually just rinsed out a lot of that stuff you're looking for.
Yes,
So,
yes. So sampling, again, like you said, user error, we call it sampling error. Definitely you need to be aware of that. Okay, I'd like to talk about how it is spread in our facilities and our pet areas, and also some of the things that we need to watch for. And this again is based on a lot of veterinary opinions. One of the things, the most common thing that spreads the virus is actually the tongs. If you're a tongue feeder, you're feeding animals off tongs. When they strike your tongue, or even if they come close to it and they have mucus there, it can get on the tongue. And then you grab the next mouse, rat, whatever you're feeding, and you go to the next animal, and it can be spread that way. And this veterinarian recommends actually having 5 sets of tongs and feeding one snake, putting it into diluted bleach where they stay, and then rinsing it off, going to the next one, rinsing it off, and then feeding the next animal.
10 minutes.
Yeah, 10 minutes in the bleach. And that can be very burdensome to people that have multiple animals. But that's what he is suggesting for the people that have nidovirus or think they have nidovirus. The other way it's spread is for people that feed live and don't use tongs at all. You put a animal in there, the snake doesn't eat it, but that animal has gone around the bin. It might have gone through the poop, it might have gone through the mucus, or even the snake has struck at the animal and touched it but did not constrict it. Then many people have done this where they take the snake out, move it to the next bin.
Not the snake, the rat.
Move the rat. They take the rat out, move it to the next bin. Well, guess what? If that rat has this virus who stays in the environment for 7 days on its fur, on its skin, and that next snake consumes it, it can get it that way. Another way it's spread is when people clean bins. One of the practices is you take the snake out of its bin, you put it in an empty bin, whether it has any kind of material in there or not. Sometimes they're just bare, sometimes it's paper, sometimes it's bedding. But then you clean the bin out, make it nice, put it back, in the rack, and then you take that snake out and put it in that bin. You're not thinking about cleaning the holding bin. So you get the second snake out, put it in the holding bin without cleaning it. But if the first snake had any mucus discharge while you were cleaning the bin, it can be spread that way.
Or if it had been through poop.
Oh yeah.
And it laid there. And another issue with that is, according to him, you would soak that container in bleach for 10 minutes every time.
In between the cleans, yes.
Same thing with your scale. You would
Yeah.
want to do your scale would need to be.
And I will disclaim that it don't always have to be bleach. There's a lot of cleaners that kill the virus, but if you read the fine print on a lot of these cleaners, they all say a soak. It's not immediate contact.
And after the soak, it needs to be a high-powered spray or a wipe, just to. This is again to make sure that you just don't miss something. Kind of like when you wash your hands. That's part of why they like you to dry it with a towel, is because if you miss something, you might get it off. We've been kind of paying attention just out of curiosity, and no, we don't have any nidovirus snakes that we're aware of, but we've been kind of, for fun, seeing how many ways we could have contaminated it, and it's really amazing. You reach for your trash can, and ours has a handle, we slide that over, or we slide our gray rolling tray over. We've touched the bin, maybe we, opened it, reached in and got the rat out or whatever. Well, technically, if you've done any of that, you grab poop out of there and then you drop it in theory, you've just contaminated the side of your trash can. So even if you go wash your hands and then you pull your trash can, I pull mine down the row as I'm cleaning, that's another risk that you don't think about. We have a water jug that we follow, if we do wash our bowls out, which is another really good way to accidentally spread this, but you pick up your water bowl or your water thing and, we will pour it in and then go to the next one. Well, maybe we didn't touch all this stuff, but if I've contaminated the outside, that handle of that bin, and then I go and touch the next one, I'm touching this handle in theory, there's a lot of ways that you don't realize
that you're doing it.
Yeah, you make a note, so-and-so didn't eat. So you real quick, or, we use our phone, we have a spreadsheet, we pick up our phone, now we wash our hands, but did you wash the phone every single time, and did you wash it well enough? So it's amazing.
And there's veterinarians that recommend wearing rubber gloves between every animal. So if you're cleaning it, feeding it, whatever, if you're touching the animal, and the things we do is we clean poop out as we go. Sometimes we're just using a paper towel, and then we have to think, oh, is it on our hands? And then we go to the next snake. So it can be spread very quickly, very easily with these things.
And you get like for us, we'll get their water, sometimes when we're doing it, we'll do one at a time. So if we're wanting to wash each bowl, we'll take the bowl, go to the sink, wash the bowl out, refill it, set it back, okay, great, and now wash my hands. But I touched that handle. I turned the water on
the sink.
And so now I get the next one, I do it, it's clean. I use my hand thinking everything's clean and turn that water off, touch the bowl, put it in. I've now put it in there and it's there for 7 days. So let's say I'd only do one water bottle or one water bowl, but then I go to feed my hatchlings the next day and I flip on that water, it's now on my hand. So gloves will work, but you still need to be aware, because even if I've been wearing gloves in that situation, I still touch that water handle.
You have to change gloves in between every animal.
So if if this is something you're super worried about and you want, you're going to say your hazmat biosecurity, you're in for
We're going to go through a lot of gloves.
The last 2 years it gets worse.
Well, and then we touched on all the fomites spreading it and stuff like that. The other thing, of course, is breeding. Breeding can spread because if you don't know if your snake has it, as soon as you throw it in with another snake, or even snake contact, people don't usually let snakes live together, but now some of the pet people out there in the world will do snake play dates, where they'll actually take a snake to another snake, which they may not be happy about it, but they will meet another snake. And it could have subclinical signs once again, which means it's shedding the virus without having any obvious clinical signs, and it can be spread that easily. Or even if they don't meet each other, I just come to your house with my snake, I want you to see it, we all handle it, it's great, we put it in the bin, then you get out a snake and we all handle it. We didn't clean properly in between, it can be spread like that.
Or you just have a visitor.
Oh yeah.
Another snake keeper comes over. Remember, it's 7 days.
So if they had handled all their snakes that morning and they come into your facility that afternoon, if they didn't do cleaning, they could bring in the virus to you that way too.
Right, so there's definitely...
It's scary.
It's a lot, if you're... This is not to scare you guys. It's just we want to emphasize that, there's a lot of information put out there. And it's like, oh, well, if you do it this way, you wouldn't ever have a problem. And if you do it this way, and it's not quite as black and white as it would be nice if it were.
Yeah.
And the level of biosecurity we're talking about right now is pretty much impossible.
In most keepers' areas.
In most yeah. That's why when there's an outbreak of something, things get cordoned off.
Yeah, that's true.
Because it's so easy to just accidentally, spread something.
Yeah. I would like to say what some of the vets are recommending for quarantine, because a lot of breeders talk about quarantine and stuff like that. So stress brings it out, and many people say the stress of shipping an animal should bring it out. Okay, but some animals don't get that stressed in shipping. Or some animals have been stressed far worse than shipping, so they are subclinical, not showing signs, they're just not going to get any worse. So one of the recommendations of research veterinarians is, and actually a lot of zoos are doing this, is when they get a new animal in, they don't test it the day they get it, because the stress may not be there immediately, or even if the stress is there, they're not shedding the virus in 24 hours. Most of us ship our snakes overnight. You have it the next day.
we're going back to Disney World. Remember, you're going to finish your trip and everybody's going to have fun. It's that 3 to 5 days later on most human viruses. Again, this is changing it, but that stress, not eating right, being tired, being exposed, or having it in your system and getting stressed out, those are the things that are going to bring that out, which means, yeah, that snake is stressed out shipping, or it may be, some I don't think care, but it may be stressed out shipping, but it just happened. It needs time. The way it works, the immune system needs to go
shedding
down.
the virus.
Yeah.
So if you're thinking, well, if the breeder has a snake that's got Nidovirus, it should show up at shipping. You still shouldn't test the day you get it. A breeder, there's some recommendations out there that breeders should test the snakes before they ship them. But if that snake's not stressed, it's not going to be shedding that virus unless it's just already full blown, which many breeders could recognize. The only reason to test before, I mean, if you get a positive, well, okay, you got a positive, they shouldn't ship the snake. But a negative test doesn't mean that it's not got it. And again, the snake's been living just fine in their racks or in their, some of these people keep them in tanks, whatever. It's not going to be shedding the virus. It's not going to be a positive test. So we ship it.
Yeah, and the other problem is, let's say that breeder tests that snake for you. So they test it, you wait for the test results to come back. It has been in that facility now. During that period, it could have actually come in contact with it at that point. Because again, what if you're trying to be super clean and you do a really good job of it, and then there's that one day that you just forget, or something happens, it's just...
Or somebody else forgets.
Or somebody else forgets. You have a visitor over there and they yank a bin open and they're excited and you didn't wash hands between. You don't know. So during that time, it could get re-exposed. And the breeder now has a negative test and is sending you a snake that is now, it's not shedding the virus, but it now has been exposed to the virus. So that's...
And remember, if according to the paper, it'll be 4 weeks if it just got exposed before it even shows clinical signs.
Right, so it definitely, yeah, that makes it challenging.
So a lot of the zoos, a lot of these research veterinarians are saying, don't test the day you get the snake, wait 3 days, 4 days, and then test. Because if it's going to break during shipping, it may not shed the virus immediately. The zoos are doing that kind of test, waiting 3 to 5 days, doing the test, quarantining them for 6 months, and doing a test at 3 months, and doing a test at 6 months. Most of the veterinarians and the researchers and the zoos, and again, we don't have all the information, so this is not in stone, but most of them are saying if you get 3 negative tests over a 6-month time frame, you can be pretty confident that that snake is negative. Doesn't guarantee it, but you can be pretty confident, and I don't know, I don't have a number for you, but not 100%, but 99% or something like that.
All right, so having said that, that was the information from the vet.
That's the information
so
from the vet.
So that is, again, we're trying to keep this clear about what is...
Research veterinarians, not a practicing veterinarian, a research veterinarians.
Right, so now we have 2 ways where we kind of play devil's advocate, I guess.
We'll do that later.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're going to do that later.
Okay.
We're going to play devil's advocate later. So anyway, so that's the standard on your quarantine. So a lot of breeders are saying 6-month quarantine. I don't know if they're testing 3 times or if they're just doing it receiving or doing it at 6 months later and saying they're negative. I don't know, and that's a decision you have to make for yourself. And if you're a huge facility, I mean, come on, if you even just have 100 snakes, 100 snakes testing 3 times, that's what, $180? And now you're talking about 180 times 100? $18,000 to test those snakes? Does that sound about right? I don't know if my math is right.
Math is not my thing.
It's more than 1,800. So, so $18,000 to test 100 snakes 3 times. That can be a lot of money. And during this time, you do have to make sure you're still doing your biosecurity, and you do have to make sure that you're quarantining any new animals coming in. So that's all the scientific data we're going to touch on, except for there's one other piece of information I'm going to say, is I've asked a lot of these, and the lab did not make this clear to me. I don't even know if we talked about it that much, but the research veterinarians said that there's not been a super uptick, a huge increase in the amount of snakes they're seeing across the board. And again, this could be a lot of breeders are culling and not testing. It could be that a lot of breeders are just not testing. They have an upper respiratory, but they're going to watch it and it can go into pseudo-remission. Or they treat with an antibiotic and the snake gets physically better, so they keep it. So there's a lot of information out there that we're missing, but currently over the last 7 to 10 years, or however long it's been since this virus has been really showing its ugly head, there's not been a massive increase, at least not significant enough that the research veterinarians are going, oh, we better watch this because it's spreading like wildfire. They're saying it's staying pretty consistent over this time.
Yes, that's really good to know that it's not like it's getting, they're not seeing that it's getting worse or anything like that at the moment.
So we've talked about a lot of the, the ins and outs of the virus. And again, if you have a different information, please send it to me. And again, I would like it backed with some scientific research. There's a lot of opinions. Sometimes opinions don't matter because observations can be skewed depending on the situation you're in. So, but now we're going to address what do we do? I mean, a lot of these people will call and say, okay, I got Nido. What do I do now? What happens here? And one thing I would like to pull across is the industry needs to understand, and even the pet owners need to understand, if you have a positive in your group, in your collection, that doesn't mean all of them are. There's this stigmata of, oh, so-and-so has a positive Nidovirus. We can never buy from that person. And that's just going to hurt the industry. Or if pet owners go, well, you can't buy from this breeder because they had a Nidovirus at X and X time, you still, that's going to hurt the industry. And you're going to run into situations where I'm going to be closed, I'm never going to bring snakes in, then you can't bring in new genes, you can't bring in, multiple gene animals that's going to boost your collection up. So we have to think about these things. What are we going to do? So we're going to talk about some of the things that we've heard and some of our thoughts. And again, these are our opinions. Most of them are just situations, and y'all can think about them and decide what you're going to do that fits you best.
Yes, none of this is, again, it's not meant to scare. Mm-hmm. It is simply because, like he said, we're seeing this thing in the industry where people are wanting it to be black and white. Like, oh, this person has a Nidovirus snake, you can't ever buy from them again. I can't risk it. And unfortunately, it's not that clear. So if we start with the shows, I think that'll show how exactly how easy this is.
Oh yeah, okay. So a lot of the research veterinarians are saying shows are dangerous. They say that they understand that in the snake industry or reptile industry, it's not just snakes, in exotic pet industry, the shows are important. The shows educate the public, shows showcase the animals that we have available, and there's a lot of sales that go through shows. But shows, just like when we had our cats and we went to cat shows are one of the easiest ways to bring back infection. For example, you have all your snakes out, and we touched on this earlier. Someone handles a snake from another booth, then comes to your booth. Yeah, they may be washing their hands, but did the first snake that touched their clothes, phone, their purse, their wallet, credit card, any of this stuff can be fomites. Did the snakes, or did the people that touched these snakes in this booth clean everything before they came to your booth?
And think about it this way, and this is really important too, if you are you're trying to say, well, you can't buy from this person because they could have they had a Nido positive. Because you need to understand that they could have gotten it from a show, or your animal from them actually could have gotten it from that show. So the breeder has never even had it in their facility. That is possible.
Yes. So
here's a couple situations, okay? So we know that everybody has the alcohol on the table, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So this is the first one. People go, and then a lot of them go on their pants, right? So if they have touched their pants or held a snake that touched their pants, or their child was touching stuff and then mommy, and held the pants. As soon as they did this, it is reinfected on their hands, okay? So now let's say, they want to see the snake. They want to hold the snake, because that would be the easiest thing, is to be like, well, then nobody gets to touch my animals. But you're probably not going to sell to a pet owner if they want to see if the animal strikes. Is it friendly? And you're not going to sell to a breeder who wants to see, does it have the yellow belly? Does it have the pied tracks? Does it, they're going to want to look at the animal.
And a lot of shows say if they're a reputable breeder, this is what you need to look for. You need to look at the snake, take it out, look for mites, or look for signs of infection.
Or stuck shed.
So a lot of the shows are wanting people to handle your snakes.
So now they wash their hands. Let's say that went well. You hand them the snake. They're looking at the snake. It's beautiful, and they're like, oh, the husband, he's holding his first snake, or the wife, and she goes, let me get my phone out, which she touched on this. Let me get my phone out. So they've touched this phone earlier, and maybe they touched somebody else's that had Nido, or they have a Nido at home that's not shown signs, or they rescued, or whatever. It's on their phone. When they stick this back in their pocket, they rubbed all those, what did you call them things?
Fomites?
Fomites. Yeah,
Fomites are the things.
Okay. So the germies, they are now inside that pocket. So even if I take a wipe and wipe this down, when I stick it back in my pocket, it's recontaminated. How many times do you see people say, look, let me grab a quick picture? And breeders are awesome. You guys are amazing about saying, here, even with me, I try to be careful of my handle on my camera, because a lot of times I'll go to these different booths and you guys will say, oh, you're going to take a picture? Here you go, and just let me at it. But the truth is, if I'm not careful to keep my camera grip and everything clean, or any other photographer that's carrying their camera around, I touch it, I say, man, that's a great snake, I love these markings, hand it back to you, and I go touch someone else's snakes, or do the same thing. I'm holding my camera, and then I need to move it a little bit. A lot of times I try to have the breeder move it. Another situation is a credit card. Let's say they love the animal. They pull out their credit card. They've just bought something on the other side with the same credit card. That breeder's touched the credit card. You've touched the credit card. They've touched the credit card. Mm-hmm. It is very, very easy to spread this, even as breeders. I know I've seen this 100 times. Somebody needs to run to the restroom. Here, can you hold my keys? And they'll open it for buyers with those keys. And you don't think about these things. And just like we talked about before, there's the 3 different stages, which means, yeah, their snakes look great. You don't see anything gasping or sneezing, doesn't mean it's not there. That also means, as a pet owner or somebody attending one of these events, let's say they touch a snake somewhere, they decide they don't want one, that individual animal, then they come to your booth and they love the snake. This is the snake. This is the one they've got to have. So they hold it, they love it, it's in the hair, all this great stuff. You give it in the cup, you sell it, right? You may never have had Nidovirus, and so that snake you sold them did not have Nidovirus 4 weeks. So they take that animal home. They were the ones, or you as the pet owner, were the ones that infected your own snake. Now you're calling the breeder upset because you got a snake from them with Nidovirus and you don't have any other snakes at home. So where did it get it? It got it from the germs you just spread from the other booths. Again, there's no way of knowing. This is the problem. This is why the blame game is not cool, because you don't know. And unfortunately, as a breeder, if somebody brings that to your booth, or it gets transferred accidentally or whatever, you go to a show next 4 weeks, you're still thinking you're selling Nido-free animals. You could already have it. You could be sending hatchlings home with it. And it's not that it's in your facility. It's not that you have sick adults. It's nothing to do with that. It's just that you were exposed at a show. So again, shows are wonderful, but oh my goodness, they're cesspools. That is probably one of the highest risks that you are going to take is not highest risk from purchasing from a show, but as far as your animals coming in contact with something.
Well, and one of the research that said it's actually safer to buy from the breeder and have it shipped than actually buy it from the breeder at a show. And again, shows are great. We love shows. We go to shows. But it's when we did the cats, we could almost guarantee that we would bring something home from every show we took the cats to. Ringworm, which is not deadly, but is a real headache to deal with in
It'll
cats.
get in your air vents.
And it gets on us. So, I mean, it's a problem.
I had friends that would actually go to shows, and each day they left the cat show, they would strip off their clothes, put it in a sealed bag, and they did that every day, a shower, all that, and then at the end they take it home and wash that separate from all the rest of their laundry. And the vet actually recommended to you that if you are going to attend a show or visit someone else's facility, that you come home
and change your clothes. He was making the point that breeders will go to shows and then go buy some of their high-dollar snakes from other breeders, and they're going to handle those snakes, but they'll isolate their snakes, but sometimes they don't isolate themselves. You could have any virus, not just Nido, or any infection on your clothing, is what he was saying. It's like there's a fungus that's in the snakes, just like in cats. There's multiple viruses. And if you've handled a lot of snakes and it's on your clothing, you don't need to go into your facility when you get home from the show. So it can be scary. And again, we're not trying to scare you. We're just showing you how easy it is to spread. So one of the concepts is, all right, you're a breeder and you go to shows. When you get home from the show, are you going to test those baby snakes? Are you going to isolate those baby snakes? Are they going to go right back into your racks? Are you going to not let people touch your snakes at a show? They never get to leave the bin they're in. And shows are very stressful. So you can bet that if you have any kind of Nido or any other respiratory, it will show up after a show. So that's one of the things that we need to think about.
And at the shows, I've been noticing a lot lately, there's a lot of rescue booths.
Yes.
There at the shows to raise funds, which is understandable. Rescue is amazing.
And it's important in any pet industry.
But most rescue are taking animals in from very bad husbandry and very bad stressful situations. Those are your very, very high risk. So having those at the show as well, and people handling them for here, I've seen somewhere that's like $5, like you get to hold and get a
hold a
picture.
snake around your
So
your
now
neck.
they've got this on their neck and everything, and then they come and they're holding yours and they're like, oh look, it's giving me a kiss. I want this as my baby. That can be very risky. We've also seen people that just bring theirs because
pets from home.
they want either get them sexed, they want to just show them off, they want to socialize. And again, this is not trying to scare and not trying to throw shade on anything. We're just trying to point out some different situations and how easily it is. Because obviously, if I was a pet owner and I went and bought a snake from a show from a breeder, it's the only snake I had, I took it home and it got sick, I am going to blame the breeder. And a vet that's not aware of how easily this is spread is going to say, absolutely, that came from the breeder. But we just showed you how easy it would be for another breeder, for exhibitors, or even yourself infecting your own snake. You get it out in the car and you're letting it rub all over you, and it's on the backpack you carried and you touched, you could be the one. So again, we're just trying to show different ways that, it's not so cut and dry. There's no reason to blacklist each other and rip into each other over some kind of result when it's unfortunately this easy.
No, and again, we love shows, and people need to show. And we're not saying you shouldn't show. So again, we're not blacklisting shows. That's just the first example, because we're going to go into all kinds that I've talked to a lot of breeders, and there's a lot of concerns. So don't say, I'm never going to show again. Some people will say that. Some breeders are saying, I'm never going to show because of the risk. And they don't. Those breeders also don't get to showcase their animals. So that's a situation that each person has to decide upon.
Yeah, and that is important. And I will say, from the cat side of things, there were a lot of cat breeders who did make the rule that you could not pet their cat because they didn't want to risk transferred disease. And we saw, and I understand that completely, but we also saw a lot of the people that were coming and looking for their next pet, they would fall in love with the breed, but they would refuse to ever buy from that. So as a breeder, we've also got to think, so let's say we show up at the show, but then we say, no, you can't touch anything unless you're paying for it. That in and of itself could almost make things worse. If they're like, oh, I met that breeder once, and that breeder was just very rude, like I was gonna get their animals sick, and I don't even have pets. Again, the breeder has the right to do that.
The breeder has a right, the pet owner has a right too.
Yeah.
So, and then the second thing, let's talk about shipping. Again, we said this earlier, breeders say, oh, let's test the shipping. A lot of people have said that. Shipping is stressful enough, so we should test when we get. And a lot of people do that. And we've had people test our snakes. Again, no positives from ours so far, and I hope we never have any. But the thing is with that is, again, if I sell a snake as a breeder to anybody and they test, it's negative 24 hours later. We've already talked about how that negative test 24 hours later may be inconclusive. Well, it shows no signs, and they test in 3 months. It's still negative. According to the veterinarians that research this in the zoo, that's a good thing. But what about 6 months later is positive? Now, am I going to guarantee you that snake? It's been at your facility. You're the pet owner or you're a new breeder. It's been at your facility now for 6 months, and it's positive. Did it come because you didn't do something right, which is what some people say? Or did it come because it came from my facility and it just didn't show up? If we have honest breeders, 100% honest breeders, we could say that situation could be either one. What if we're dishonest? There's a lot of dishonesty out there. And I'm going to go over a couple of those things too. But let's go back to the honest breeder. Are we going to guarantee a snake for Nidovirus 6 months down the road? Because let's say you're a good breeder and a good pet owner, and you quarantine that snake and you say, I've never had it around another snake for 6 months. I have to believe that you're being honest. I have to believe that you have good biosecurity, that you're changing your gloves and all that. And that's a difficult situation as a breeder. When we bred cats, infectious disease was only 2 weeks. 2 weeks is it, because after that, it probably came from one of your other animals.
Well, and you spoke to a breeder who tested, remember?
Oh yeah, there was a breeder who tested the snake at shipping. It was negative. Tested it at 3 months. It was negative. And then at 6 months, it was positive. Tested again, it's still positive. So we are saying this is a positive
Which,
snake.
going back to, they said that the zoos were doing the 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, you're clear. Here is one of my concerns. One, like I said, this breeder has very good biosecurity. And it was negative until 6 months because he tested it because he was pulling it out of quarantine to put
And he's going to put it in his general population.
So
as positive.
it had been exposed to no other animals. So, you know, to as described. So basically, that zoo thing wouldn't really have worked because it broke at 6 months. And it showed no clinical signs up until that point. Now, one of my concerns as a breeder is that the way animal systems work and the way stress works, it works a lot the same in humans as well. But we imported a lot of cats from overseas, a lot of cats. And typically shipping, same with like most animals, actually there's shipping fever in horses and everything. Shipping does tend to bring out, if they've been exposed to something, the immune system drops because they travel. Jet lag, we do it too. The problem is that we had some that were shipped overseas, which is like a multi-day experience on an animal. And for a cat or a dog or something like that, it can be even more traumatic because they're not used to being in those situations. You know, at least in a snake in a box, that's kind of like, oh, this is dark. It's a comfortable temperature. It's a little, and it's usually 24 hours. Not always, but usually. So anyways, we'd get these cats, and we had some that would come by the time, because it was 3 or 4 days, they would have broke with something by the time they got there. Then we had some that they would arrive, and they would arrive fine, but within the week, they had broke. And then we had cats that came and showed absolutely no signs. Perfectly healthy. The testing would all come back clear, no problems. Now, when we did our cats, we kept them divided so that there was not, the cats weren't exposing each other to all different things. So we knew, like we imported 2 sisters, and they arrived and they were healthy, no problems. And then they had hormones, which is another huge stressor.
Breeding, yes.
A huge stressor. And as soon as those hormones hit the body, their immune system went out of whack, everything was crazy, and they broke with upper respiratory, and they had been around no other animals, which meant they had come with it because that was the only thing they'd been exposed to. So again, having tested at the beginning, perfectly fine, but later they broke with it with breeding. That's one of my concerns with the Nidovirus, is you think about a male, maybe he didn't care about shipping. He's a sturdy bloodline, healthy snake, eats well, no problems. Now he's going to be a breeder. He goes off food because, he's more what is that joke? You know, they can stand to lose a few pounds if he's getting some.
Yeah, if he's finding a girl.
Yeah. So, but that is a stressor on the body. Between impressing a female, breeding the female, not eating properly, that's going to stress the snake out. Same with the females. They're forming follicles. They're trying to get their body ready. There's a new male in their bin. There's a lot of stressors. So on some snakes, that's, you know, a year to 2 years old is when that is going to happen. And that's one of my concerns is, you know, you get a snake that's cool. It's been in captivity. It doesn't freak out in shipping. But then it could break later, and you would have, you know, you're going to assume, oh, 2 years down the road, that had to be from my facility, but it actually, in theory, could still be from the breeder's facility if it's a stressor that has to cause it to break.
Speaking of what you touched on there with international shipping, that's the other thing we as breeders have to understand. If you import Canada or from Canada, the United States, or even we've imported from Europe, a lot of these snakes go through someone else who actually takes them out of the packaging and puts them somewhere to make sure they're fine. They drop off at ham all in one group.
Yeah.
You would think that the individual boxes will keep them safe, and they should, but what if they do take them out and make sure they're fine before they ship them? We have received snakes from international shipping where the breeder sent us pictures of what they were shipping in, and the boxes we got were not the same, which means that somewhere along the line they were taken out of those original containers and put in a separate container. And you have to trust along this entire process that everybody had their biosecurity. If not, then you can't go through international shipping.
Yeah, because I mean we know because we've had people message us and say, yeah, the snakes did good. We took them out, we fed them, we watered them, you know, just taking care of them. We've also had snakes that we know were repackaged, where, you know, they were sent from Canada or another country, and they arrived with different packaging because a lot of times they're shipped in a lump shipment, and then whoever gets them then divides them up and sends them to the individual person. So again, you've got whoever was overseas, because most breeders drop them off with somebody who prepares them for that international shipment, and then they send to their contact in the U.S. or
vice versa.
And then that person has them, separates them, rebags them up, or, you know, boxes them up and sends them out. And again, if they, you know, the poop, in theory, because if you're using bags, because we've gotten snakes before they use the bathroom, it happens, you know. But you think about it, if during that group shipment, your snakes or somebody else's snakes use the bathroom, in theory, it could leak through. The same with the plastic containers with the holes, you know, your two little noses.
Breathe and sneeze through.
So you're definitely, that's another risk factor, which means when you get that snake, you do your testing or whatever, and you're like, oh no, I've got a sick animal. You can't actually blame the breeder, because the breeder has no way of knowing if it came from them or at one of the middle people or you, because at this point it's now gone through this whole cycle.
And in theory, with the incubation period that we have, yes, if it did before the 4 weeks break with it, or even some of these labs are saying they can detect it earlier, but what if it's 5 weeks? How are you going to blame? You going to blame the shipper? Going to blame the intermediary? You're going to blame the original breeder?
Yeah, we were part of a shipment that went to Canada, and there was like a 2 or 3 week delay.
Yes.
And it had to stay over at someone's facility, and they took care of it, and everything was fine, but it still had, you know, it was more than 1 week. It was several week delay, which means that unfortunately that would be long enough to have been infected, and not necessarily, because again, this is not about blame, not necessarily by the intermediary. That intermediary just took in more snakes than he can quarantine, because there's no way, if you take in a whole group of snakes, nobody has enough spaces in their house to actually truly keep these animals.
If they're coming from different breeders, you have to have different quarantine areas and all that stuff.
So we're not saying there's blame anywhere. It's not that it's the intermediary, the shipper, you know, whatever. It's just, unfortunately, if there is a sick animal in that group, which could have even got sick if it was dropped at a show, you know, just a pet owner could have brought it in that doesn't realize they have it because their snake's not stressed out, and you know, you just don't know. That is the hard thing about it, is this is not necessarily, you know, it's not like, oh well, they got it because they're dirty or they don't take care of their animals. That's not how this is.
Well, and we talked about this with the cats. There are different strains. There are strains that are more virulent? Virulent. Can't say the name. So there's more strains that can affect these snakes more aggressively. Okay. And there are snakes that have better genetics in their immune system. So like when we're dealing with the cats, some of these cats would come in, they could be exposed to any of these viruses and get over it. And other cats get exposed to the viruses, they're sick for 3 or 4 weeks. And the same goes for the viruses. Some viruses would go through the entire facility. It's like every cat is sick. And then another one may be, oh, that one has a runny nose and nobody else gets it.
And we had, here's another example of that, is there is a breed of cat. He talked about FIP earlier in cats. And that is something that they have to be exposed to young. And pretty much every vet on God's green earth will tell you that, oh, once you get, it was a year?
It was a year old or older, they're not supposed to get it.
They like literally, it's an impossibility. That's what vets are taught. Like you're not going to look for it, you're not going to be prepared for it, because it's something that they either get as a kitten or they don't. And by the time they would get exposed to it as an adult, their immune system is just not going to get it.
Yeah.
Now there is a breed of cat out there that cannot handle it, because it's a pedigree. So obviously now they've bred these particular lines, and this breed has more than one line that when exposed to it, they cannot handle it. And I even told Johnny that back when we were doing breeding, and he said, no, cats can get exposed to it, but usually like 6 months is typically you would see it 6 months and under, maybe pushing it to a year. And then you had 2 clients come in, and you said it's the weirdest thing. He came home and he told me, and he goes, I'm telling you, these look like FIP cats, but they were like 1.5 and 2 years old.
Older cats.
Older cats. And he said, it makes no sense. And I said, well, what are they? And they were that breed. And I said, they can get it. And he didn't, at first he didn't, but then they ran the test, and it was FIP, and there wasn't anything that they could do, because it's one of those things where if it mutates, it will kill them, and unfortunately, they're very susceptible. And the same with the hot strain of herpes.
Oh yeah.
You know, we had cats where you could expose them to it, and they would never break with it. Like some of them you could still test, and they would be asymptomatic carriers, or even shed it, but never. In cats, it's watery eyes, sneezing are usually your first signs, your kind of clues. They'd never do any of that. But then there were other lines that if they even came within like so many feet of it for like a briefest of second, they would never get over it. Their entire life, they would chronic, eye tear stains. They might get, I just forgot, the fog.
It's
ulcers.
Ulcers on their eyes.
Yeah, the ulcers on their eyes. It can damage. It like eats away at the nasal passage, so they sound like Darth Vader all the time, and they can't handle it. And then you have this middle ground where they get it. If they sniffle, they sneeze, it's viral, which means, there are some antiviral medications, but they don't always work the best. So you treat for secondary infections, and when the cat gets over it, never have a problem again, or they might, when they stress out, they might have a little sniffle again, but then they're fine. And it's believed that 95% of cats at this point, is what the studies have shown, is that had it. So the problem isn't that they have it. The problem is that
the ones that don't get over it.
The ones that don't have the immune system. So this is, of course, opinion, but I am very interested with the ball pythons, if certain collections, that are perhaps a little more inbred, especially like when we first started getting the ball pythons, they would have had a higher rate of inbreeding here. Did that possibly play a factor in how quickly it spread? Because sometimes you hear, we have stories of people where they get exposed and it's like they've lost their entire collection like that.
Yep.
It just boom, 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 down. But then we've also heard stories where they are truly dumbfounded because they get just one random one, and they're testing like crazy, and nothing else, nothing ever happens, and it just confuses them. And it's like, I'm kind of wondering which it would actually be kind of good news, if they are building this immune system. But unfortunately, because people are afraid to talk about it, or they are just not, it's too scary to risk, we're not getting to know if it goes into remission, like if it can go into remission, or they can become asymptomatic long term. Can they survive? Can they be fine? Will they break with it again? There's just not enough information. This is where we need to be able to talk about things instead of if you say, hey, listen, I got this and I'm wondering what's going to happen, and you're open with it, that could end up getting your name dragged through the mud.
Oh, yeah. Well, let's play some devil's advocate about getting your name through the mud.
All right.
All right. So when you think about the way this is right now, and we've seen it online, there's Facebook posts of so-and-so has Nido, don't buy from them. If you go to these, what are they, Facebook FBI groups?
Oh, yeah. They're like review groups.
Review groups where my snake was sick and they didn't do anything about it. Well, that's what we have to think about as breeders. Again, I've asked the question before, I ask it again. Where are we going to draw our lines? Are we going to guarantee these snakes for only 2 weeks like we did with the cats? And I'm pretty sure that's what we say on our snakes on our website is 2 weeks, maybe it's 3 weeks for infectious disease. Are we going to stick with that? Or are we going to say, okay, no, we can extend it to 4 weeks because that is the incubation period. But what about the people that say, well, no, I've only got one snake and it's from you and it broke with Nido 6 months later or a year later? Are we still going to guarantee that snake? And what does that guarantee mean? We giving money back? We replacing the snake with another snake? What if they don't want a snake from you? And here's the next question. Let's say you sell a snake. It has Nidovirus. You get it back. You make it right. You're a great breeder. You get it back. You do give them their money back or give them a new snake, whichever one that buyer wants. What do you do with that sick snake? Do you test it and it's negative and test it again, it's negative, test it again, it's negative? Do you resell it at that point? Or do you euthanize it? Because euthanizing snakes is common and a lot of breeders are okay with that. But I can tell you right now from the cat world, a lot of pet owners are not going to be okay with that. That's why there's rescues. And the rescues are from pet owners a lot of times that's trying to save these snakes. And there's a great need for rescue people. But what are you going to do with that snake if it comes back to your facility as a positive and you know it's positive and you test it again and it's still positive? What are you going to do?
And you've got to remember that, you know, it's unfortunate. It's one of those very unfortunate situations. We've seen friends go through this in the other animal worlds where, for whatever reason, whether you take that animal back and maybe it was a genetic fault, you know, something just wasn't right with that animal, but they could still live a somewhat normal life, but they might be risking another animal in that situation. Breeders, I mean, you don't want, well, I wouldn't want an animal that could possibly infect my other animals.
Correct.
But on the flip side, if you place this with a rescue, you're also, you could be infecting other animals there.
At that rescue.
Yeah. So it's one of those things where it's very scary, and you have to remember, because we're seeing this a lot where, you know, there is a lot more of the pet world coming into the reptiles, where it was mostly serious keepers for the most part. Now you're getting a lot of people where, you know, there's birthday parties and, like you mentioned earlier, play dates and all these things.
Play dates for their snakes and their lizards, and that's wonderful for these people.
But if you sell them this animal, they're upset. So you make it right. You give them their money back. You take this animal, and a lot of times, unfortunately, I know breeders across all species that sometimes take them back even knowing it wasn't their fault. But it's honestly just not worth it to deal with the owner. They take it back. So now you take this animal back. You make the decision that it does need to be euthanized. It needs to be humanely euthanized. That owner is going to continue to contact you.
Because they want to know what you did with that animal.
Because that was their baby, and they loved it for however long they had it. And then if you're trying to make things right because you want a happy buyer and you don't want your name blasted on Facebook or in YouTube videos or whatever, now, unless you are prepared to lie, which, you know, it's not my favorite thing, but unless you're prepared to lie and tell them, oh, it went to a great home, or I have a friend that has no snakes and they wanted it and they're taking care of it, if you're honest and say, well, no, I'm not sure where the infection came from, but I can't risk my collection, which is the truth, then your name is going to end up online anyways, because they're going to say what person would put an animal down, and, you know, that's just cruel. And if they did, well, they wouldn't put it down if they didn't think they were at fault. You know, you can open yourself up for a whole nother can of worms from on your reputation from the flip side. So it's almost, you're danged if you do and danged if you don't, unfortunately.
Continue down the lines of devil's advocate. What if breeders don't get along? So here's a whole different can of worms, because we've seen this. Overall, the snake, reptile industry, exotic industry, there's a lot of people in it, and some people are bad, but most people are very good with each other. There's differences, but compared to some of the mammal world, like dogs and cats that we've been exposed to, the snake industry is pretty tame on their backstabbing and on all that stuff.
Sabotage.
Sabotage.
There's a lot of that.
There's a lot of it in the cat show world and the dog show world.
And horses, oh my goodness,
Lord.
they have to hire security sometimes.
So we want to say that coming from that world to the snake world, we have found it's actually just a breath of fresh air. That most snake people, even if they don't care completely, they act like they care. I mean, so
you guys are good at faking it.
You're good. So I have to say that it's just very tame, and we're enjoying the snake world. But let's say we've seen some fights on lines, we've seen some disagreements.
And that's one of the differences. In the snake world, most people, like if you don't like someone, you're just like, I'm going to avoid them.
Yeah,
like,
just not going to be around them.
Yeah, you're not going to go out of your way to try to make their life miserable. And that is what we've seen, is that in the other animal world, I mean, I've seen in the cat world even, where one breeder bought the website domain that would look like that, like another breeder's website. They made it look like it, and then just like put all this like nasty stuff about her, so that whenever a pet owner or a potential buyer would try to find it, that was the website, because she paid for ads, so that they would hit this website, because she just wanted to mess with her.
She
didn't like her.
She just wanted to mess with the breeder.
She thought that maybe that the person didn't do her right or something, and she wanted to mess with her. And there's a lot of situations like that. So now you open it up to...
So let's talk about the snakes, all right? So there's these tests that the snake owners can do. We all know about them. I can order one right now. It costs me a certain amount of dollars to be shipped to my home. If I'm a dishonest breeder, let's say I'm a liar and I'm going to get someone, I know I have a snake that's got Nido in my collection, in my facility. Let's say I know that. I can take that swab that snake, but put on the form that it belongs to this snake that I just got from that breeder. Then I send it off, and I get it back in a few days, and I say, look, you have a positive snake. Now, I can do multiple things with that. If I'm really mean, I can start trashing that breeder online that you've got Nidovirus. And that is what's happening a lot. I've seen on many Facebook posts, so-and-so's got Nidovirus. I've had phone conversations with people, so-and-so's got Nidovirus, don't buy from them. So I can trash you. 2, I can make you give me my money back on that snake. And what if it's an adult breeding male and I've had it for 4 weeks, or a little less than 4 weeks, I could pair that male in theory. If I'm good, I could pair that male with 2 or 3 females or even more, and then make you give me my money back and send a snake to you. Or even worse, the snake is so sick I euthanized it and it was positive, it's your fault.
Yeah.
Now you're giving me my money back on a snake you don't get back because I have lied, because I've tested this snake over here, which is not even your snake.
Or you send it back, and now as the breeder, you're panicking, because you're like, where did it come from? What happened? You're making tough choices. Let's say you test it, it's negative, but it's in the back of your mind. Was it positive? Was it negative? Meanwhile, that buyer just got to use one of your animals for free, and now it's theirs. Same as, here's 2 other ones. One is they just want their money back. Like, I want a really pretty snake, and I know I have a Nido snake, but it's fine. It's living fine, but I really want that $5,000 snake from this breeder. So they buy it from you, and then they ask you, well, what are you going to do with it? Are you going to euthanize it? Because I only have 1 snake. I could set it up in another room, and then you're like, well, I'm going to euthanize it, so what am I going to do? You give them their money back and let them keep the snake, because you think it's going to die because it's got Nido, and they just cheated you out of a $5,000 animal because your snake was never sick at all. I mean, there's unfortunately a lot of ways. It could be, unfortunately, we have to worry about animal rights. I mean, in this industry, it'd be very easy for an animal rights person to do that.
Oh, that's a whole different ball game. That's a whole different ball game. If we start letting it out that we have a virus that's killing a bunch of snakes, and the animal rights people gets a hold of that, we're worried about all these laws being passed that regulate our industry, regulate our pet ownership. I mean, pet people talk about this and that. There could be regulations. Now we have this virus that's killing everything. So let's just take one positive snake, test it 100 times, and put different names on it. And they can come through, because no one's regulating some of these tests, and say, look, we found 100 ball pythons that have this virus in this one area. We got to pass a law. They're just spreading disease. It's going to kill everything. This is some extreme stuff. And again, we know this is extreme stuff. We're wanting to push the limit with you guys so you all can understand some of these things.
Yeah, it's a slippery slope. I mean, again, because it would be so much easier if that test was 100% accurate. Because I think every reputable breeder on earth would go through and test all their snakes if you knew that, like, it's absolutely going to be shedding.
If it's black or white, yes.
If it's black or white, it would be very, very simple to do that. In the cat world, like rabies, or in the cat world, when we do go to these shows, you can't even step into the show hall without showing this rabies certificate for each of your animals. That way everybody knows that it's fine. The spectators aren't going to, get bit. There is a reason to that. But these are things that are 100%, and unfortunately right now we don't have enough research on the Nidovirus, and there isn't a 5-step plan of this is going to solve the problem. So what we're pointing out is people do game the system. It's sad, and you don't want to think that, but we have seen this over and over and over. We know of people that purposely have gamed the system. We know breeders who they know that they're adult animals, they're adult cats. They know that they have whatever virus, because there's multiple, whatever. They know they have it. But what they've done is they make sure not to test them. They'll test the babies before the babies have a chance to break with, this upper respiratory or whatever. And then when the pet owner messages them, because now they've seen all online that, oh, you want to make sure you buy from a breeder that doesn't have blah, blah, blah. And they'll say, do you have a, whatever disease-free facility? And they'll say, oh, yes, we've never had a positive here. Meanwhile, their cats are as sick as can be. But the way they word it is that they don't have a positive, which is the truth, because they're not going to test what they know will be positive, because then it's a whole other thing. And, they've convinced buyers, instead of just telling buyers that, it's a matter of, choosing good lines, doing the best you can, being as clean as you can. Unfortunately, there's the wording tricks, there's
manipulation of the test, manipulation. I mean, again, I could just barely swab one and send it off. It's going to come back negative, even though it might be spit and snot. So there's a lot of ways around it.
And you got somebody that don't like you. I mean, think about it. Say there's this person that just has it in for you. They hate that you are so successful. They hate that you're doing all these things.
You're doing a wonderful job, but they hate it.
Yeah, and you guys know right now, if they went and swabbed the animal and they found the way to cheat the swab and posted it online, you know what kind of stuff that breeder would go through right now. And they could sit back and giggle and laugh over the whole thing, because that breeder is now going to have to defend themselves forever and ever, amen, and they didn't do anything, and that person just had a friend buy their $100 snake, and now they get to make them miserable, because there is such a stigma attached to this.
Yeah, so we've babbled now about a lot, and we could keep going because we still got some stories we didn't even touch on, but I think that we've talked a lot, and I hope that we've educated people. I hope that we've let people understand that we shouldn't make it such a negative thing every single time, and there's always exceptions to these rules.
I wanted to say one more thing. This is more directed toward the pet owners.
Oh.
So we talked about how it can be spread in a breeder's facility, and we talked about, shows spreading it and things like that. But as a pet owner, there are a couple things that are common. He made the joke about the play dates, but we've heard a lot of where a person will get a snake and they will bring it to a show, or they'll bring it to a local pet store that's really trusted. And, you know, because they want to help maybe get ID on the morph, or sex the animal. Or we know a couple people that would actually, they didn't have a scale, so they would take the animal every few months there just to get a current weigh, and then that pet store owner, because they were super helpful, would tell them what appropriate sized rodent they needed to move up to or not move up to. And I know a lot of people, they will like to take them out to the pet stores, because I mean, it's educating the public. You know, hey, I've got a snake, you take it out. You've got to remember, one, each of these outings is a stressor. Which means that you are at higher risk of breaking with something or catching something, because it is. The pet store owner is, a lot of times they are taking animals from wholesalers, so it could or could not have brought something in. You've also got, if other people are doing the same thing, if other people are bringing their snakes in to get sexed and all that, and or just going to pick up their rodents. You know, I mean, there's pet stores where people go to pick up their rodents. You touch the countertop, somebody else touched the countertop, credit card. Same thing again. As a pet owner, you actually could take something back. Or, oh man, that's a beautiful snake. You're at the pet store, you want a picture with this person's snake. Well, that's fantastic. But remember, it's in your hair and everything. So as a pet owner, you still have to be aware. You get something secondhand. You want a bigger tank for your baby. You know, well, somebody's snake just died, blah, blah, blah. You know, a simple wipe might not be enough. You might want to do a little bit more.
Heavier clean.
Yes. And if you're doing rescue, again, we've said this before, that is amazing. Thank you. That's awesome. Just be very, very careful when you're doing that, because you are taking them from, sometimes it's cohabiting situations where more than one snake are there. These are animals that are in high stress. Who knows where they came from? Who knows where they've been? So you just want to make sure that you're aware of where you could be accidentally contaminating your own pets with this virus as well. So just, you know, kind of keep that in mind.
I forgot we wanted to talk about that, so thank you for bringing that up. So I guess to the end of this, we're getting ready to close on this, is a lot of people have asked us questions. Again, we've tried to touch on this. We hope we've answered a lot. And then ultimately, because I am a veterinarian, people say, well, what do we need to do? And it's different for every single person. And I hate to say it that way because that's kind of a cop-out, but it is. I mean, in the ideal world, we would quarantine our snakes for 6 months. Not everybody has a quarantine area. If that quarantine area is anywhere near their normal collection, it's not a quarantine area. Because again, a quarantine area is away from the collection where you can't accidentally move from a sick snake to a non-sick snake. So that means that you would do your quarantine area last. You would never go back into your regular facility or even your regular feeding area if you raise your own rats after you go into your quarantine area. But some people have that. Quarantine area, you test 3 times on every snake coming in. You monitor your snakes. So the second thing would be monitoring the snakes, and any upper respiratory that you see, any real loss of appetite. Now we know ball pythons don't like to eat many times, but if you have a situation where that one should be eating and I don't know why it's not eating, or it's losing too much weight, because we know that they go on hunger strikes, they don't lose a lot of weight during breeding season and such things as that. But if they're losing a lot of weight, those snakes should be tested. And then at that point, when you're sending snakes out, you just have to stand behind them. We've asked the question, how long? And I don't have that answer. I mean, by the book, 6 months. But we know that that's not practical for either the buyer or the seller. So you have to ask yourself these questions and decide. But as a veterinarian, I would say test anything sick. Test before you introduce them into your general population. Quarantine if you can, if you've got a place to do that, and just be aware of your biosecurity. And that's true with any disease in any snakes, because we know that some reptiles have some very bad things. When I deal with cattle, they have some very bad things that these cows get it. Don't expose those cows to your other cows. Same goes for our cats that Brittany's touched on. Dogs are the same way. But what it boils down to, though, is in the snake world and in the reptile world generally, we're blackballing people or we're saying this is a bad thing because there's a positive test. But in the rest of the world, we're not actually doing it as bad as that. In fact, there is some diseases, and I told another breeder this, in cattle, where the cows will die. A baby cow will just drop dead from this disease. But if that happens to a farmer, the rest of the farmers don't say, we can never buy cattle from that farmer again because they had a case. No, they don't do that. They do the same thing that we've all done for years with our snakes. We monitor, we isolate when we can, we stand behind our products, we watch out for each other, and then we move on. Yeah. And I hope that's the point that we get across in this video.
Yeah, is that, and testing is great. There's, like you've said before, some of these people have very large facilities and they're not seeing a problem. So is there any reason for them to spend, that amount of money on the testing?
Yeah.
And so one of the points that we kind of wanted to talk about is there isn't actually enough data right now to show that because you test does mean, like, whatever, that it does mean you won't have something. Unfortunately, it could still be there. So you can't pick a breeder at this point. Well, I mean, you can, but whether a breeder chooses to test everything or not test everything doesn't necessarily make them a good or bad breeder, or mean that they're free of something or not free of something.
Well, the research vets say it's impractical to test the entire collection because, once again, if they're not stressed out, they're probably going to be all negative. Yeah. Even if you got a positive there, it's probably going to be negative if it's not stressed out. If it's not shedding the virus that day. And
that could be an impact, because you think about it, breeders have to take on a cost like that. Some of these bigger breeders, is that going to impact money that's being donated to USARC and for some of these other causes? Because now they've got a new business cost. And from everything we've heard at this point, it doesn't appear that that necessarily is going to be like, oh, this is now a Nido-free facility. So it's tough, and obviously every buyer and every person has to make their own decisions, because there isn't, hopefully we'll get more information. Hopefully people can share and we can get more information, and the vets can get more information.
But even with all the information, just like with our cats, there's a lot of information on herpes virus, but it's still there. It's still in the cats. There's dogs that have their problems. It's still there. It's still in the dogs. Cattle, I've already touched on that. We're going to have problems. We're going to have problems in any large population of any species.
And the thing is, a lot of times you're going to know. If you have searched and there's a feedback post in one of these groups, like, oh, I got a Nido animal from so-and-so, and you find one post, or you even find maybe two posts, that doesn't mean they're a bad breeder. Now, if you are reading a bunch of posts where it's like, this person got it, and then they replaced my animal, and that replacement animal got it. Because this is what happens when there's a problem in a facility, is there's a lot of people reporting the same problems. There's a lot of people that are very unhappy because the animals either got replaced with a sick animal, or they didn't replace them because the breeder chose not to take responsibility, and that's a problem we talked about pet owners being able to scam people, but a breeder can just say, well, no, it's not my fault. It's not my fault. It's not my fault. And it could not be, but as breeders, we need to take accountability for our own thing. If we get one back and we're not seeing sick animals, it can be like, wait, where did that come from? Yes. You've got multiple people telling you that they got sick animals from you. You really need to sit back and figure out what is going on, what you need to test, what you need to quarantine. You have to start rethinking things. That's the thing. We're going to have to all be ready to kind of shuffle. Like, you spin up, something happens. Okay, now we need a course of action. So I think a lot of it's going to come down to, working with a breeder who stands behind their animals and being logical from both sides. Yes. A pet owner being reasonable about the situation, a breeder being reasonable about the situation. And again, it's pretty easy. There's a few breeders out there that don't have the greatest reputations for whatever reason, and there are a lot of posts about why. And I think that just because you see one post about someone, let's stop taking that and running with it and making it, this the standard by which we can judge people, because Unfortunately, honestly, a lot of people probably have it or have been exposed.
According to a lot of the breeders I've talked with, a lot of the vets I've talked with, it's out there. It's out there in multiple places, and if you have a lot of snakes in your collection, you probably have one hiding somewhere. And it just hasn't shown you enough signs yet.
And I mean, it's not like there's a vaccine or something like that.
There's not a vaccine,
so,
and
unfortunately, at this point,
there's not a track and trace. It's like, oh, we can look at the snake lines. No, there's not anything like that.
And while it's like you said, it's not like it's just becoming crazy and it's spreading like wildfire across everywhere. It's not. There's like, there might be a break somewhere, but it's not like that. But it's not going away either.
No, it's here.
Which means ideally, again, it would be fabulous if it was something that snakes could get this immunity to, and then the immune systems are what we're worried about, not necessarily the disease itself. Obviously, you would continue to try to prevent it, stay clean, do all these things, but it would be better if the snakes were just
more naturally immune.
Yeah, like, okay, whatever, we got it. We don't like the chicken pox with kids.
We get over it. So, if you have questions, of course, there's comments. Brittany's discussed whether we should even have comments on or not.
You better be nice.
If you're nice on the comments, we'll leave them on. If you're not nice, we'll delete them or whatever. But email us, gobblesreptiles@gmail.com. That's gobbles with an S, GOBBLES, reptiles with an S. @gmail.com. You can email us there. We check it periodically. If you have a debate that you want to have, please have some backup data for that, because I don't want to debate with just an opinion, because everybody has one of those, and we know the rest of the saying.
and we've shared opinions too. We tried to make it clear which parts were from the researchers and which parts were just from our experience, and then that common knowledge of between talking to breeders and talking to researchers. But this part of this is our opinion. We're just wanting to share our thoughts, because a lot of people keep asking us, and they're like, we wish people would share this. What is your thoughts?
And that's where I was going with that. If you want to email your story with Nido, I will not share your name, your facility, or anything, but I will share it with other veterinarians, because I talk with them. I talk with the research veterinarians. They want this information. They want to know how long someone has kept one alive. They want to know how many eggs they got from a positive female that did not have any signs on the babies. They want to know how many times they've bred a positive pair of snakes and they're still alive today. They want to know how fast they die. I mean, did you get a male that's positive and you tried to breed and it dropped dead? They want to know these things, and a lot of this information is not out there for the different stigmatas, the different attitudes that we have. So send us the emails. If I get a whole lot, I'll have to answer them in my spare time, so it might be a while, so don't get mad at me if it's a few days before you get a response.
Yeah, and he doesn't do YouTube. I run the YouTube channel. So if it is a question that you have for him specifically, he may not see it in the comments. So that is another reason to email him, because he's happy to talk to people, but he is not a lot on our social media. So when questions get asked there, a lot of times they do get missed, unfortunately.
And we're going to share this to Facebook and probably Twitter and all the other ones. I'm not on there either. So if you don't send me an email and you just say, hey, I got this, one, Brittany may not see it, or if she does, she's going to have to forward it to me, and that still may not come across my table. So, go to the Gobbles Reptiles and send us a message. If you don't have anything to say, just enjoy the video. I hope you got educated. Hope you enjoyed us. If you didn't, I'm sorry.
And of course, we know a lot of people have a different opinion, and that is totally fine. And just like we said in the video, everybody needs to figure out what they're comfortable with and what they want to do. And the truth of it, as far as we're concerned, is people just need to be nice. They need to be nice to each other, take care of their animals, take care of their buyers. And, buyers, we love the buyer support. That's awesome. Buyers need to also understand that it's, unfortunately, some of the information out there where it does make it seem cut and dry isn't.
And I do want to say, I'm not your free vet care, so don't start asking me 1,000 questions. Just believe it or not, I get 1,000 questions on everything else on my emails. But I will try to guide you as much as possible. And if you do have a veterinarian that you use regularly and they need to speak to me a little bit, I don't mind telling them what I know And again, I'm learning every day. I talk all the time. I've still got classes coming up on reptile medicine. I've learned some interesting things. Maybe we'll do a video on artificial insemination of snakes, because I learned that the last class we had. And it's like, what am I going to do with artificial insemination of snakes? But, you know, we learned.
Never know when that might come in handy.
Who knows? So, and we hope to give you some more, you know, genetic videos down the road. A lot of people loved our Mandarin video. We got some more Mandarins coming. We got some new genes coming out. We want to help, you know, people to identify. So, you know, we're not big on YouTube, but we're trying. So
He gets to retire soon, so we're very excited to.
Oh, August 19th, I'll tell you right now, 2 months.
Yeah, so we're hoping to actually start being a little more regular here. So that's another thing. If you want to drop something in the comments where if there's another topic that you're interested in hearing his opinion on as a veterinarian, or just our opinion as breeders, no promises, but we're open to suggestions of that kind of thing. Again, this one we mainly made this one because we've been asked so many times, and it's just
shows and calls and everything. And for those of you that are watching this, call me. I appreciate it. Call me. I'll talk about them. Again, I'm busy sometimes. I may not get back to you soon, but just give us a buzz.
Yeah. So thank you, and I hope this helps someone, and we hope you have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.